Jonas Ashford looked Levi dead in the eye and said it straight. "Leave this ranch before sunrise, or I will drag you out myself." Cora stood frozen behind the door, every word cutting through her like cold iron. The one man who had made her feel alive again after 3 years of grief, and her own father was throwing him out like a stranger. What could make a father so afraid that he'd rather break his daughter's heart than risk losing her to love again? Hit like, subscribe to the channel, and drop your city name in the comments. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Don't miss the ending. It will stay with you. The argument started before breakfast. Cora heard it through the floorboards. Her father's voice, low and deliberate the way it got when he had already made up his mind about something and was only bothering with words as a formality. She recognized that tone. She had grown up fearing it. She pressed her bare foot against the cold pine boards and listened, and what she heard made her stomach drop straight to the floor. "I don't care what you fixed or what you think you proved. That's not why I'm telling you this." A pause. Then a voice she didn't recognize answering, quieter, steadier, like a man who had learned not to waste his anger on people who weren't listening. "Then why are you telling me?" "Because I know you're kind," her father said. "And I know what happens when men like you decide to stay somewhere they weren't invited." Cora moved to the top of the stairs without thinking. She wasn't dressed. Her hair was still loose from sleep. She didn't care. She had heard her father drive men off before. Ranch hands who talked too slow, or drank too much, or looked sideways at the wrong thing. But those conversations happened out by the barn, or over supper, or in the quiet way a man got handed his pay and pointed toward the road. They didn't happen like this, sharp-edged and deliberate, before the coffee was even made. She reached the bottom step and stopped. Her father was standing near the front door with his arms crossed and his jaw set, wearing the expression that had scared her since childhood. Not angry, exactly, but closed, locked from the inside, like a man who had decided something and was done being argued with. Across from him stood Levi Hartwell. He was tall and lean, the kind of lean that came from actual work rather than not eating enough. His hat was in his hands. He hadn't shaved in a few days. He was looking at her father with the steady patience of someone who had been through worse conversations than this one, and he was not going to be the first to look away. "Dad?" Cora said. Both men turned. Her father's expression shifted, not softening exactly, but folding inward the way it did when he was recalibrating. "Go back upstairs, Cora. I live here." "So do I, and I'm telling you to go back upstairs." Levi glanced at her for only a second, long enough to take in that she'd heard everything, long enough to register some private decision behind his eyes, and then he looked back at her father. "Mr. Ashford," he said, "I'll leave if that's what you want. I'm not going to stand here and argue with a man on his own property, but I'd like to know what I did wrong, if it's all the same to you." "You didn't do anything wrong," Jonas said, and somehow that made it worse. "That's not the point." "Then what's the point?" Her father's jaw tightened. He looked at Levi the way he sometimes looked at the river after a hard rain, like something that had the capacity to cause damage, whether it meant to or not. "My daughter," he said, "has buried enough." The words hung in the air between the three of them. Cora felt heat crawl up the back of her neck. She understood now. This wasn't about Levi's work or his history or some grievance her father had manufactured to justify a decision he'd already made. This was about her. It had always been about her. Her father had watched her break apart once, and he had spent 3 years constructing walls around her life that he called protection, and that she had been too exhausted to fight. "Dad," she said quietly. "Stop. I'm not talking to you about this. You never talk to me about anything. You just decide." She stepped off the last stair. "You decided I should stop wearing black after 6 months. You decided I shouldn't take the teaching job in Fredericksburg because it was too far. You decided Wesley's letters should go in the trunk and not on the shelf where I could see them." Her voice was steady, which surprised her. She had rehearsed versions of this conversation 100 times in her head, and it had never come out steady. "And now you're deciding this." Her father said nothing. "He's been here 2 weeks," she said. "He's done everything you asked without complaining once. He fixed the fence on the north pasture that's been broken since before Christmas. He gentled that bay mare that threw Jake twice. He hasn't asked for anything extra, and he's not bothered anyone. She looked at Levi for just a moment. She couldn't help it. And then back at her father. And you're running him off. Before breakfast. Without a reason that holds water. Jonas unfolded his arms. He walked past both of them toward the kitchen without a word, and that was answer enough. Levi put his hat on. I'll get my things, he said. Wait, Cora said. He stopped. She didn't know why she said it. She hadn't planned to. She barely knew this man. 2 weeks of proximity and a handful of conversations that had felt oddly weightless compared to the conversations she'd been having with people she'd known her whole life. But she said it anyway, and she meant it. Give me an hour, she said. He looked at her. There was nothing romantic in the look. Nothing like that. Not yet. Not even close. Just a quiet consideration, like a man measuring the gap between what he was being offered and what he was being asked to trust. I'll be at the barn, he said. She found her father at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and the expression of a man who had made his peace with something that hadn't actually been resolved. Cora sat down across from him. She didn't pour herself coffee. She folded her hands on the table and waited. You want to explain this to me, Jonas said. It wasn't a question. No, I want you to explain it to me. He looked out the window. The morning was clear and blue and the kind of quiet that made you forget the world had hard edges. In a few more weeks, the bluebonnets would be up along the fence line and across the lower pasture. And Cora thought about the dress in the cedar trunk upstairs and felt something tighten in her chest. He reminds me of Wesley, Jonas said finally. She had not expected that. He doesn't look like him, she said. No, it's not how he looks. Her father turned the cup between his hands. He had big scarred hands, ranch hands, the kind that had pulled calves and strung wire and done 100 other things that didn't have a word for the toll they took. It's how he moves, how he talks. Wesley used to look at you the same way. Dad, I know. He held up one hand. I know what you're going to say. That I'm seeing things that aren't there. That I'm being a foolish old man. He set the cup down. Maybe I am. But I watched you put yourself back together, Cora. It took you 2 years before you laughed at something without catching yourself. 2 years before you slept through the night. And I was here for all of it. And I can't... He stopped. His throat worked. I can't watch that happen again. I don't have it in me. Cora was quiet for a long time. I'm not asking you to watch it happen again, she said. I'm asking you to stop treating me like I'm made of something that breaks. You did break. And I put myself back together. She met his eyes. That's what people do, Dad. That's what you taught me to do. He looked away. She left him there with his coffee. The barn was cool and smelled of hay and horse, and the particular kind of quiet that Cora had always found easier than the quiet inside the house. Levi was brushing down the bay mare, the difficult one, the one who had thrown 2 men, with long, even strokes that the horse was leaning into with her eyes half closed. Cora stopped just inside the door and watched for a moment without announcing herself. He was talking to the horse, low and unhurried, the way some men talk to animals when they thought no one was listening, like the talking itself was the point, not the words. Don't know what you were so worried about, he was saying. He's just a man. All the worst ones just want to feel like they're in charge of something. A pause, then, you and me both know how that goes. The mare nickered. Yeah, Levi said. That's about right. Cora stepped farther in and the straw shifted under her boot, and he turned without startling. That was a thing she had noticed about him. He startled differently than most men. Not jumping, not grabbing for something, just a quiet turn, like a man who had spent a lot of time waiting for bad news and had stopped being surprised by it. You can still talk to him, she said, if you want to stay. I don't think he wants me to talk to him. No, she admitted. He doesn't, but he'll get over it. Levi set the brush down on the rail and turned to face her. He was backlit by the gap in the barn wall where a board had been missing since last summer, and the light caught the dust in the air around him. And Cora thought, briefly, without meaning to, that she had stood in this exact barn doorway 3 years ago, watching Wesley curry his horse in almost exactly this same light. She pushed the thought down. "What did he tell you about me?" Levi asked. "Nothing specific. He said you remind him of someone." "Of Wesley." She didn't answer, which was an answer. Levi nodded once, slowly. He wasn't offended, which she found strange. He didn't look defensive or diminished. He looked like a man hearing information and figuring out what to do with it. "He loved him," Levi said. "You're Wesley." "Everyone loved Wesley." "That's not what I meant." He leaned back against the stall rail. "I meant your father loved him like a son. That kind of love doesn't end up in the grief books. It just sits there." Cora felt something shift in her chest. Not painful exactly, but close. "How would you know that?" He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked back at the mare. "I had a brother," he said. She waited. He didn't say anything else for a while. When he did speak, it was in the same tone he'd been using with the horse, low and careful and not looking for a reaction. "His name was Cal. Younger than me by 4 years. Worked the same ranch in New Mexico for most of his life." A pause. "There was an accident 8 years ago." Another pause, longer. "The kind of accident where afterward you spend a lot of time thinking about the 5 seconds before it happened and what you could have done different." "I'm sorry," Cora said. "I know you are." He said it without deflecting, which she hadn't expected. Most men, when you said you were sorry, either dismissed it or got uncomfortable. He just received it like it was something plain and true. "I left the ranch after that. Moved around a lot. Worked wherever someone would have me." He looked at her then. "Your father's right that I don't stay places long. I'll give him that much." "But you came here." "But I came here." He almost smiled. Not quite, but close. "Your brother Daniel flagged me down on the road and told me your father needed a hand who could handle difficult horses. I wasn't planning to stay more than a week." "What made you stay the second?" He considered that. "The work needed doing," he said, which she was fairly certain was not the whole answer, but which she decided not to push on. She looked at the mare, who was watching both of them with the placid, ancient patience of an animal who had long since made peace with the unpredictability of humans. "My father is going to be difficult," Cora said. "He won't apologize. He'll just gradually start pretending the morning never happened." "I can work with that." "You'd stay, even after what he said?" Levi picked up the brush again. "He didn't say anything I haven't heard before. And he didn't say anything he didn't mean, which I respect, even if I don't like it." He ran the brush along the mare's shoulder. "Besides, the north fence still needs 2 more posts before it'll hold through summer." Cora almost laughed. She hadn't been expecting to. "Fine," she said. "I'll tell him you're staying. You don't have to fight my battles for me." "I'm not," she said. "I'm managing my father. That's a different thing." She turned to go. She was nearly at the barn door when he said her name, and not her full name, just Cora, like he'd been saying it for years, which he hadn't. She stopped. "The dress," he said. She turned. He was looking at her steadily. Not invasively. He wasn't that kind of man, but with the particular attention of someone who had noticed something and decided not to pretend he hadn't. "What dress?" she said, and she knew immediately from his expression that the deflection hadn't worked. "The pale green one," he said. "I saw it hanging on the line behind the house my first morning here. Your sister took it in before I could ask." He paused. "But I saw your face when she did." Cora went very still. "It's just a dress," she said. "All right," he said, and went back to brushing the mare. She stood there for a moment, wanting him to push so she could push back, and he didn't push. He just kept working, and the horse kept leaning into the strokes, and the dust kept drifting in the light, and Cora walked out of the barn with the feeling that she had been understood by someone who had the decency not to say so. She went upstairs after that and opened the cedar trunk. She hadn't opened it since last spring. She always told herself she wasn't ready, and then April would come and the bluebonnets would appear in the lower pasture, and she would find herself sitting on the edge of her bed with the trunk open and the smell of cedar and lavender rising around her, and the dress folded inside like something preserved, like something waiting. Her mother had made it. That was the part Cora didn't talk about with anyone. People knew about Wesley. The whole town of Millvale knew about Wesley, had mourned with her, had brought food and sat on the porch and said the things people said. But her mother had died 6 weeks before the wedding, and so the dress had been finished in grief and had never been worn, and the two losses had become braided together in Cora's memory until she couldn't think of one without the other. She lifted it out now and held it against herself and looked in the mirror above the washstand. The pale green had faded slightly at the shoulders. The stitching along the bodice, her mother's stitching, tiny and even and patient, was still perfect. It would always be perfect. Her mother had been the most careful woman Cora had ever known. She thought about what her father had said at the kitchen table. "I watched you put yourself back together." She thought about what Levi had said in the barn. "I left the ranch after that, moved around a lot." Two people, she thought. Two people who had decided that the safest way to survive their grief was to stay moving. Her father in the opposite direction, nailing everything down, keeping everything still, building walls around what he loved and calling it safety. She put the dress back in the trunk. She wasn't ready. She knew she wasn't ready, but she was beginning to understand that ready might not be the thing she was waiting for. Supper that evening was the kind of quiet that had a shape to it. Her father at one end of the table, her brother Daniel at the other talking about the cattle situation in the north pasture, her younger sister May filling in the silence the way she always did, with small observations and questions that kept conversation from dying entirely. Levi sat at the middle of the table and said almost nothing, but he listened. Cora watched him listen, not the polite listening of a man waiting for his turn to talk, but the genuine kind, the kind where you could see him actually taking things in. When Daniel mentioned the fence issue, Levi said 2 sentences about the posts and why they'd been failing and what needed to be done, and Daniel nodded like this was information he'd been waiting for. And even Jonas, who had been cutting his meat with the precision of a man doing surgery on something he resented, paused for half a second before going back to his plate. Cora caught May's eye across the table. May raised one eyebrow, her entire vocabulary of the unspoken compressed into a single gesture, and went back to her biscuit. After supper, Daniel and Levi went out to check the stock, and her father went to his study, and May helped Cora clear the table with the efficiency of 2 women who had been doing this particular task together for 20 years. "He's interesting," May said, stacking plates. "He's a ranch hand. Ranch hands aren't usually that quiet. Some are. The quiet ones are the ones who have things to say," May said, with the confidence of someone who had read slightly too many novels. "The loud ones are just filling space." "May, I'm just saying." "I know what you're saying." May handed her a stack of plates and looked at her directly. May had their mother's eyes, dark and direct and not easily fooled. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine. You opened the trunk today." Cora went still. "How did you—" "The cedar smell. You've had it on you all evening." May said it without judgment, just observation. "You don't have to tell me why." "I know I don't. But you can, if you want." Cora set the plates down. She looked out the window above the wash basin at the dark yard and the darker line of trees beyond it, and the first scatter of stars just appearing above the horizon. "Do you think Dad's right?" she said. "About Levi? About him leaving?" May picked up the dish rag. "I think Dad's right that he might leave. I think Dad's wrong about what we're supposed to do with that." "Which is?" "Probably not nothing," May said. "That's usually the wrong answer." The night was cool and smelled of cedar and coming rain. When Cora stepped out onto the back porch with a cup of tea she didn't particularly want, but which had given her an excuse to be outside. The barn was dark. The yard was quiet. Down past the fence line, she could hear the low sound of the creek that ran through the lower pasture, and beyond that, farther south, the river. Millvale Creek, locals called it, though it ran deep enough in spring to deserve a bigger name, where Wesley had drowned 3 years ago trying to move cattle across a flooded crossing. She didn't think about that crossing as often as she used to. That was progress, she supposed, though it never felt like progress. It felt like forgetting something, and forgetting felt like betrayal, even though she knew that it wasn't. The bunkhouse door opened. Levi came out with his own cup, saw her, stopped. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then she lifted her cup slightly, the kind of gesture that meant I'm not going anywhere without saying anything that required a response. And after a moment he came and sat on the far end of the porch steps, close enough to be company, but not close enough to be intrusive. And they were quiet together in the way that two people are sometimes quiet when they have both discovered that the other person knows how to hold silence without making it into something. The creek ran in the dark. The stars came out. "You didn't have to stay," she said, eventually. "I know. He's going to be difficult. I wasn't exaggerating." "I know that too." He looked out across the yard. "I've been run off from better places for worse reasons. At least here the reason makes sense. It doesn't make sense. It makes sense for a man who's lost what he's lost." He said it without defense or accusation, just the plain weight of it. "I'm not saying he's right. I'm saying I understand it." Cora looked at him sideways. "You do that a lot," she said. "Do what?" "Understand things from people's side even when they're wrong." He considered that for a moment. "I was wrong once," he said, "about something important. And the people around me decided they understood my side well enough not to blame me, even when I deserved it." He took a sip of his coffee. "I figure I owe that out somewhere." She didn't ask what he'd been wrong about. She thought maybe she'd find out eventually, or maybe she wouldn't. And either way, she understood that some things needed to be offered rather than excavated. "The dress," she said. He didn't look at her. He just waited. "My mother made it," she said, "for my wedding. She died 6 weeks before I was supposed to get married, and then Wesley died 3 months after that. And the dress just..." She stopped. "It's the only thing left that has both of them in it, if that makes any sense." "It makes sense," he said. "I wear it every spring, when the bluebonnets come up." She could hear how it sounded. Strange, private, the kind of ritual that didn't translate well to words. "I know it's not strange," he said. "I wasn't going to say strange. You were going to say something like it." She almost smiled. "I was going to say particular." "Particular is fine," he said. "Particular is what people have instead of nothing." She looked at him then, actually looked at him, the way she had been carefully not doing all evening. He was looking out at the yard, his profile half lit from the lamplight through the kitchen window, and he looked like a man who'd been carrying something for a long time and had gotten so used to the weight that he'd stopped noticing how it bent him. She recognized that. She recognized it the way you recognize your own name in a foreign language, with a start, and then a long, slow settling. "What do you carry?" she asked him. He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. "The look on his face," he said finally. "When I didn't get there in time." She didn't ask anything else. The creek ran in the dark, the stars came fully out. They sat on the back porch until the lamp in the kitchen burned low, two people who had each learned how to grieve alone and were only now, in the most tentative possible terms, beginning to suspect that they didn't have to. Jonas's study light burned all night. In the cedar trunk upstairs, the pale green dress lay folded in lavender and silence, waiting for spring the way it had waited every year. Not for someone to forget the past, but for someone, finally, to be brave enough to carry it forward. Jonas Ashford did exactly what Cora had predicted. By the following morning, he was speaking to Levi in the clipped, functional tones of a man who had filed something away and was not planning to retrieve it. Not warm, not apologetic, but workable. The way two people can share a table after a hard conversation by agreeing, without saying so, to treat the conversation as something that happened to someone else. Levi took it without comment. He showed up at the barn before anyone else was awake, had the horses fed and the water troughs checked by the time Daniel stumbled out with his boots unlaced and his hair still bent from the pillow. He didn't push for acknowledgement. He didn't make Jonas feel the silence of the apology that wasn't coming. He just worked, and in working, made himself harder to resent. Cora noticed. She suspected Jonas noticed too, which was precisely why he avoided looking at Levi directly for the first 3 days. The bluebonnets came up that week, not all at once. They never did. They started in the lower pasture, along the fence line where the soil ran thin over limestone, and then spread up the hillside in the slow, inevitable way of things that don't ask permission. By Thursday morning, the lower field was solid blue, and Cora could see it from her bedroom window when she woke. and she stood there in her nightgown with her hand flat on the cold glass and looked at it for longer than she should have. She did not go to the cedar trunk. Not yet. She got dressed and went downstairs and made coffee and told herself she was fine. She was not entirely fine, but she was functional, which in the Texas Hill Country of 1886 was close enough to the same thing. The north fence took 3 full days to repair properly. Levi had assessed it that first week and given Jonas a direct accounting. Not sugar-coated, not inflated, just the plain truth of what was failing and why, and what it would cost in time and materials to fix it. 6 posts were rotted through at the base. The wire had been strung wrong along one stretch, putting all the tension in the wrong place so that one hard season would pull the whole section down. Whoever had done the original work had known enough to look right, but not enough to hold. "My last hand," Jonas said when Levi laid this out at the supper table Thursday evening. He said it like a man confessing something unpleasant. "Paid him for the work. Didn't check it close enough." "It happens," Levi said. "Not on my ranch, it shouldn't." Daniel looked at Cora across the table. She kept her expression steady. "I can have it done by Saturday," Levi said. "If Daniel helps with the post setting, that part needs 2 people." Jonas looked at Daniel. Daniel nodded. Jonas looked back at his plate. "Fine," he said. It wasn't gratitude, but it wasn't opposition either, and for Jonas Ashford in April of 1886, the distance between those 2 things was closing. Cora rode out to the north pasture Friday morning, not because she was needed and not because anyone had asked her to. She told herself she was checking on the cattle situation along the eastern edge, which was true, technically, in the way that most things she told herself in those weeks were technically true and not the whole truth. She found Levi and Daniel working the 3rd post, Levi driving and Daniel holding the rail steady, and both of them red-faced and sweating in the April heat that came earlier every year now and stayed longer. She pulled her horse up and watched them for a moment before either of them noticed her. Daniel was talking. He was always talking, her brother, the way some people fill silence because they're genuinely afraid of what it contains. And Levi was listening with the same quality of attention she'd noticed at the supper table, not waiting him out, actually listening. "And the thing is, I told him the crossing was running too high," Daniel was saying, driving home whatever point he'd been making before Cora arrived. "But Jake never listens to anything that inconveniences him, so he tries it anyway, and sure enough, loses 2 head, Levi said. Loses 2 head, and then blames the river." Daniel shook his head. "The river didn't make him stupid." "No," Levi said. "Rivers are just rivers. They don't have an opinion about you." Daniel laughed, the quick, easy laugh of a young man who didn't laugh reluctantly. And then he spotted Cora on her horse and raised a hand. "Come to supervise?" he called. "Come to check the east cattle." "Sure you did." Levi looked up. He had his hat pushed back and his shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow, and there was a streak of red clay along his jaw from where he'd pushed his face into his shoulder at some point. He looked at her the way he'd been looking at her since the porch, not with anything that could be named or pointed to, but with a kind of careful attention that she was finding increasingly difficult to be indifferent to. "East cattle are fine," he said. "Checked them this morning." "Then I'll check them again," she said. He almost smiled. She turned her horse and went east. She did check the cattle. She also sat on the ridge above the pasture for 20 minutes and looked at the lower field where the bluebonnets had come all the way up to the fence line now, solid and blue and indifferent to the weight of what she associated with them. And she thought about the dress in the cedar trunk and her mother's stitching and the particular quality of the silence that had lived in the house since Wesley died, and that she had gotten so used to she had started to mistake it for her own personality. She was still up there when Levi rode past below, heading back toward the barn. He didn't look up. She watched him anyway. It was May who finally said what everyone in the house was thinking. Saturday evening, after supper, after Jonas had retreated to his study and Daniel had gone to play cards at the Heller Ranch 2 miles east, May sat down across from Cora at the kitchen table with the expression of a woman who had been waiting for the right moment and had decided this was it. "I like him," she said. Cora kept her hands around her coffee cup. "You like everyone." "That's not true. I didn't like that surveyor who came through in February." "Nobody liked him." My point stands. May folded her hands on the table with the prim precision of a schoolteacher, which she had been, briefly, before their father decided Fredericksburg was too far. I like Levi Hartwell specifically and deliberately. He's not performing anything. That's rare. He's quiet. He's present, May said, making the distinction with the firmness of someone who had thought about it. Most men are either performing or absent. He's actually there. Cora said nothing. Cora, don't. I'm not doing anything. You're about to tell me something you've decided I need to hear. May was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was gentler, which was somehow worse than the precision. You've been going to the window, she said, the one that looks out on the barn. Cora set down her cup. I'm not in love with him, she said. I've known him for 2 weeks. I didn't say love, May said. I said, you've been going to the window. The fire in the stove ticked and settled. Outside, the night was still and the creek was running quiet, and somewhere down in the lower pasture the bluebonnets were standing in the dark. Invisible but there, the way some things are present whether you look at them or not. He lost someone, Cora said finally. His brother, 8 years ago. I know, he told Daniel. Cora looked up. He told Daniel? Apparently they talked for most of Friday while they were setting posts. May picked up her own cup. Daniel said Levi told him that he spent 8 years moving around because every time he stopped somewhere, he started thinking about Cal, and he didn't know what to do with that. Cora absorbed this. The fact of it, that he'd said it to Daniel, easily, in the way you said things to someone while your hands were occupied with something else, felt different from him saying it to her in the barn with the careful economy of someone rationing a private truth. What else did Daniel say? She asked. That he thought Levi was the kind of man who told you exactly what he was, May said. Not what you wanted to hear, not what was comfortable, just what was true. She paused. Daniel doesn't say that about many people. Daniel's 19. Daniel's a better judge of character than either of us want to admit. May stood and picked up the cups. I'm going to bed. I'm just saying, the window, Cora. You don't do things without a reason. She left. Cora sat at the empty table and listened to the house settle around her, and then she got up and went, without particularly planning to the window above the wash basin. The barn was dark. The bunkhouse had one lamp still burning. She stood there for a while, and then she went to bed, and she didn't open the cedar trunk, and she didn't look at the dress, but she thought about her mother's stitching, tiny and even and patient, and the way some things got made with such care that they outlasted the hands that made them. The incident with the bay mare happened on a Tuesday, the week after the fence was finished. Her name, the name Daniel had given her, which Jonas used despite himself, was Cinder. She had come to the Ashford ranch the previous fall as part of a lot of 3 horses purchased from a ranch outside Kerrville, and she had thrown her first rider within a week and her second within 3, and Jake, who was the Ashford's senior hand and who had opinions about every animal on the property, had declared her untrainable and recommended selling her to someone who wanted the aggravation. Jonas had agreed with the assessment. He'd been planning to sell her at the spring market. Nobody had told Levi this because nobody had thought to, and Levi had been spending 20 minutes a morning with Cinder in the round pen since his second day on the ranch, not riding her, not pushing her, just moving with her in the particular way that some men moved with difficult animals, slow and consistent and utterly without ego. Cora had watched from the fence twice without saying anything. On the Tuesday in question, she was watching from the fence when Jake came up beside her with his arms crossed and his expression arranged in the way it got when he was building toward a point. Waste of time, he said. Maybe. I rode that mare twice, he said. She's not right in the head. Or she just didn't want to be ridden by you, Cora said, and immediately wished she hadn't, because Jake's expression shifted in a way that meant the point he'd been building toward was now sharpened. Your father's planning to sell her, Jake said. I don't know if your new hand knows that. He's not my hand. He's sleeping in the bunkhouse on your father's dime, Jake said. Near enough. In the round pen, Levi had stopped moving and was standing still in the center, while Cinder made slow, exploratory circles around him. Not running, just moving, the way an animal does when it's trying to decide whether something is safe. He knows what he's doing, Cora said. He knows what he's doing with a horse that's going to the market in 2 weeks, Jake said. All he's doing is making her harder to sell. Cora didn't answer. Jake walked away. She stayed at the fence. After another 10 minutes, Levi moved to the edge of the pen and picked up a lead rope and walked back to the center, and Cinder, the horse that had thrown 2 men, walked directly to him and dropped her head and let him put it on. Cora exhaled slowly. Levi looked at her over the horse's neck. She's not difficult, he said. She's careful. There's a difference. Jake says she's going to the market. Something moved across his face. Not surprise exactly, but a brief private reckoning. When? 2 weeks, maybe 3. He looked at the mare. She was standing quiet now, head low, ears relaxed. He ran his hand down her neck once, slowly. All right, he said. He didn't say anything else about it. He put Cinder back in her stall and went to work on the water line that had been giving trouble near the south barn, and Cora stood at the round pen fence a little longer than she needed to, trying to put a name on what she had just watched happen and finding that she didn't have one. She told her father about it that evening, not expecting it to change anything and not entirely sure why she was telling him. Jonas listened without looking up from the account book he was working through. Jake says she's unmanageable, he said. Jake couldn't manage her. That's different. Jake's been working horses for 20 years. And Levi led her with a rope after 10 days of groundwork that he did before anyone was up in the morning. She sat down across from him. I saw it, Dad. She walked right to him. Jonas turned a page. He's not a trainer, Jonas said. He's a ranch hand. I hired him for fence and stock work. He's doing all of that too. Cora. I'm not arguing. I'm just telling you what I saw. Her father set down his pen and looked at her. Not the closed look. Something more complicated. Something that had layers she couldn't fully read. What do you want me to do with that? He said. It wasn't hostile. It was a genuine question, which surprised her. I don't want you to sell her, Cora said. Not yet. Give him the rest of the month. Jonas picked up his pen. Fine, he said. The rest of the month. It was the second concession he'd made in 2 weeks, and both of them had come more easily than the first, and Cora walked out of his study thinking about what May had said. The window, Cora. And whether the window was only about Levi or whether it was also about this, the slow, incremental possibility that something in this house might be shifting. China. The night Levi told her about Cal, really told her, not the careful ration of truth she'd gotten in the barn, started as an accident. She had come out to the back porch again with tea she didn't want, which was apparently becoming a pattern she wasn't going to examine too closely. And he was already there. Not sitting on the steps this time, but standing at the porch rail looking south, and she could tell from the set of his shoulders that he'd been there for a while and that he had not been thinking about anything comfortable. She almost went back inside. She didn't. Can't sleep? She said. Sometimes I can't. He didn't turn. Sorry if I'm in your way. You're not. She sat on the top step. It's a porch. There's room. He was quiet for a while. The creek ran in the dark. The southern sky was enormous and clear, the kind of clear that only happened when the air was dry and the world had the decency to hold still. Do you dream about him? She asked. Your brother. He turned at that. Slightly, not all the way. Sometimes, he said. Not as much as I used to. I used to dream about Wesley every night, she said, for almost a year. She looked at the dark yard. Then it slowed down. Now it's once a month maybe, and I feel guilty about that, like I should be fighting to keep it. She paused. That's stupid, isn't it? No, he said. It feels stupid. Most true things do. He came and sat on the rail, not the steps, the rail, leaning back against the post with his legs stretched out. It was the most relaxed she had seen him in any social context, which told her something about the difference between night and day, between witnesses and none. Cal died because of a gate latch, he said. She waited. We'd been meaning to fix it for 2 months, he said. It stuck. You had to lift and twist at the same time, or it didn't catch right. Everyone on the ranch knew. We all just worked around it because there was always something more urgent. He looked at the sky. A colt got into the equipment yard one morning. Cal went in to get him out. The gate didn't latch behind him. He stopped. There was a piece of machinery he couldn't see from where he was standing. Cora was very still. I was the one who was supposed to fix the latch, he said. I kept moving it down the list. The creek ran. The stars were out in their thousands, indifferent and ancient. Levi, she said. I know, he said. I know what you're going to say. You don't. He looked at her. I was going to say, she said carefully, that Wesley died because the river was running 6 feet above normal and the cattle foreman decided to push the crossing anyway, and Wesley went in after a calf that slipped, and the foreman had a decision to make every step of the way that day and made all of them wrong. She met his eyes. Wesley died because of a chain of things. So did Cal, and you can find your link in that chain and hold on to it for the rest of your life. And I understand why you do, but it is not the whole story. And it was not only you. He was quiet for a long time. I've had people tell me that before, he said. I know. It doesn't usually help. I know that too, she said. I'm not telling you it'll help. I'm just telling you it's true. He looked at her with something she couldn't entirely name. Not gratitude, not relief, something more complicated than either. The expression of a man who has been carrying something alone for so long that being seen with it felt like both a relief and an exposure. You're different than I expected, he said. What did you expect? Someone quieter, he said, from how your father talked about you. My father talks about me? He told me the first day that his daughter had been through enough and that I should conduct myself accordingly. He almost smiled, but there was real weight behind it. I think he meant it as a warning. It came out sounding more like what? Like a man describing something he was proud of, Levi said, whether he meant to or not. Cora looked at her hands. Her father. Proud of her. It was not a thing Jonas Ashford said, had never been a thing he said, and yet she believed it the way Levi had said it. Not as comfort, just as plain fact, observed by someone with no reason to manufacture it. He loved my mother, she said after a while. They were married 31 years. When she died, she stopped. He got very small. Not the way you'd expect, not crying or falling apart. He just got small, like he was trying to take up less space in a world that had become too large and too dangerous. She looked up. And then Wesley, and then he got smaller still, and now he's just... She made a gesture she couldn't find words for. Building walls, Levi said. Yes. I know that, he said quietly. I've been doing the same thing. She looked at him. The moving around, he said. I told myself it was because I couldn't stay, that being still was the thing I couldn't manage. But it wasn't about staying or moving. It was about... He stopped, working for the right word. About not building anything. Because if you build something, you can lose it. If you're always leaving, you never have anything to lose. But you lose it anyway, Cora said. You just lose it emptier. He was quiet. Yeah, he said, finally. That's about right. The lamp in the kitchen had burned down. The house was dark behind them, and the yard was dark ahead, and the only light was the scatter of stars above the hill country and the thin silver line of the creek in the near distance. I'm going to wear the dress this week, Cora said. It came out before she'd decided to say it. She didn't take it back. Levi didn't react the way she expected. He didn't say anything reassuring or meaningful. He just nodded once, slowly, like a man receiving information that made sense. Will you go to the chapel? He asked. I usually do. Alone? She looked at him. He wasn't offering to come. He was asking a factual question with something underneath it that she wasn't ready to address directly, and they both knew it, and they were both for the moment willing to leave it there. Usually, she said. She went inside not long after that. She lay in bed looking at the ceiling, and she thought about gates that didn't latch and river crossings in flood, and all the small ordinary failures that accumulated into catastrophe. And she thought about what it meant that she was telling a man she'd known 3 weeks the things she'd stopped telling people who had known her for years. She didn't have a clean answer for it, but lying there in the dark, she noticed that the silence in the house felt different than it had a month ago. Not smaller, not less heavy, just occupied differently. Like a room that has been empty for years, and someone has left a coat on the chair, and the room hasn't changed, but it no longer feels abandoned. Downstairs, she heard the front door open and close as her father came in from his nightly check of the stock, his boots on the floor, the familiar creak of the third stair. The sound of a man moving through a house he knew by heart, in the dark, without a light. She fell asleep before she heard his door close. Outside, the bluebonnets covered the lower pasture in the darkness. Blue that couldn't be seen but was there anyway, the way some things persist whether or not there's anyone to witness them. In the cedar trunk, the pale green dress waited, and it had been waiting long enough that it had learned patience, the way things do when they belong to people who are not yet ready but are, slowly and despite everything, getting there. She wore the dress on a Wednesday. She hadn't planned it for a Wednesday. She hadn't planned it for any specific day. Exactly, the way you don't plan the moment you finally decide to do the thing you've been circling for weeks. She just woke up that morning and the light was particular, coming through the window at the angle it only hit in late April, and the bluebonnets in the lower pasture had reached their fullest, and she lay in bed for 10 minutes and then got up and opened the cedar trunk. She didn't let herself think about it. Thinking about it was what had kept the trunk closed for the past 2 weeks, even after she'd told Levi she was going to wear it. She just lifted the dress out and put it on, and stood in front of the washstand mirror and looked at herself until she was finished being surprised by what she saw. She looked like herself. That was the thing she always forgot, and always forgot she forgot. She looked like herself in a pale green dress, not like a woman preserved in grief, not like something from another life. Just herself, with her mother's stitching at the bodice and the hem that was half an inch too long because her mother had always made things with room to grow into. She went downstairs. May was at the stove. She turned when she heard Cora's boots on the stair and went still for just a moment. The particular stillness of someone absorbing something that requires a second to land. And then she turned back to the pan and said, "Coffee's ready," in a voice that was completely normal except for the small, careful way she said it. "Thank you," Cora said. She poured her coffee and stood at the kitchen window. The lower pasture was solid blue. The morning was clear and already warm, the kind of Texas spring morning that made you understand why people came here and stayed before the summer arrived, and you remembered the other side of that bargain. She heard boots on the porch, and then her father came through the back door and stopped when he saw her. Jonas Ashford was not a man who showed things easily on his face. He had the kind of face that had been weathered into a kind of permanent neutral, not cold, just held. But he looked at his daughter standing in the kitchen in the pale green dress, and something moved through him that he didn't manage to hide entirely, and Cora watched it happen and didn't say anything. He went to the coffee pot. "You going to the chapel?" he said. "Yes." He poured his coffee. His back was to her. "I'll have someone check on the horses while you're gone." "I won't be long." "Take as long as you need." He turned and looked at her. A real look, not a held neutral one. "You look like your mother," he said. He said it the way a man says something he's been holding on to for a while and has decided the cost of saying it is less than the cost of not saying it. Cora's throat tightened. "I know," she said. He nodded once and went to his study. And that was the whole of it. No more than 30 seconds. No declaration, no unraveling. Just a man and his daughter in a kitchen on a Wednesday morning, and 30 seconds that held 3 years of things that hadn't been said. She took her horse south along the fence line and then east through the lower pasture, riding through the bluebonnets rather than around them, which she'd been told her whole childhood not to do, and which she did every year anyway because walking through them on horseback was the closest thing to walking through water that she'd found on dry land. The old chapel sat at the eastern edge of the Ashford property, where it met the ridge, built by her father when Cora was 7 out of limestone and timber, and a conviction that a family needed a place to mark its occasions. It had no affiliation, no congregation, no preacher. It was just a small stone building with 4 pews and a window on the east wall that let in the morning light, and that her mother had hung a piece of blue glass in because she thought plain light was fine, but colored light was better. Cora tied her horse and went inside. The blue glass threw its light across the floor in a shape that changed with the season. In winter, narrow and northern, in summer, wide and high. In April, it fell almost exactly across the second pew from the front, which was where her mother had always sat, and which was where Cora sat now. She didn't speak. She didn't have a practice of speaking in here. It had never felt like a place for talking, only for sitting with things. She sat with the dress and what it meant to be wearing it, and she sat with her mother and Wesley, and she sat with the fact that it had been 3 years, and she was still here, and still breathing, and still apparently capable of feeling things she hadn't planned to feel about a quiet man who was fixing her father's north fence and talking to horses before anyone else was awake. She sat there for maybe 20 minutes. When she came out, Levi was leaning against the fence post where she'd tied her horse. He wasn't doing anything, not pretending to check something or passing through on his way somewhere else. He was just there, hat in his hands, looking at the eastern ridge with the patient stillness of a man who had been waiting and was not bothered by the waiting. She stopped. "You didn't follow me," she said. It came out more like a statement than an accusation, which was what she'd intended. "No," he said. "I was checking the cattle on the east edge. This was on my way back." He looked at her. Something in his expression adjusted. Not pity, not sentimentality, just a plain acknowledgement, like a man looking at something true. "You all right?" "Yes," she said. Then, "Mostly. That's honest." "I try to be." She came and untied her horse. He moved to give her room without making it into a gesture. "May says you told Daniel about Cal." "I did." "She said you said it easily, like it wasn't hard." He thought about that. "It was easier than usual," he said. "Daniel's the kind of person who doesn't make a thing bigger than it is. Some people, when you tell them something heavy, they pick it up and hold it in a way that makes it heavier. Daniel just nodded and kept setting posts." He paused. "That's a skill not everyone has." "He gets it from my mother," Cora said. "Dad holds everything like it weighs twice what it does. May holds it carefully, like it's fragile. Mom just received things, set them down next to her. Didn't make you sorry you said them." "You have some of that," he said. She looked at him. "The night on the porch," he said. "You didn't make me sorry I said it." She looked at the dress, at the pale green fabric across her knee, at the edge of her mother's stitching visible at her wrist. "I know what it costs to say something like that," she said. "I didn't want to make it cost more." He nodded. He put his hat back on. They rode back toward the house together and didn't talk much, which was fine, which was, she was finding, one of the easier things about him. The silence didn't demand anything. That afternoon, Jonas Ashford called Levi into the barn. Cora found out about this from Daniel later, who had been at the far end of the barn pretending to repair a bridle and had heard the whole thing. Her father had apparently stood in the barn aisle with his arms crossed for a full minute before he said anything, which Daniel described as the longest minute of his recent memory. Then he said, "I want to be straight with you." Levi said, "All right. My daughter has been through things that would have broken most people. She didn't break, but she came close, and I was here for that, and I am not prepared to watch it again." "I understand that," Levi said. "I don't think you do," Jonas said. "I don't think you understand what it means to watch someone you love lose something that was supposed to be their whole future. You had a brother. You lost him. That is a terrible thing. But you weren't married to him. You weren't building a life around him." His voice didn't rise. It never rose. Wesley was the future she had planned for since she was 16 years old, and it went. All of it. Levi said nothing. "I'm not running you off," Jonas said, and Daniel reported that this sounded like it cost him something to say. "You've done good work, and you've earned your place here. But I'm telling you plainly that if you are the kind of man who moves on, and I have reason to believe you are, then I am asking you to be careful about what you build before you go." Levi was quiet for long enough that Daniel said he'd started to think he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, "Mr. Ashford, I've been moving for 8 years because I was afraid to stay anywhere long enough to lose something again. That's the truth of it, and I'm not proud of it. I came here planning to stay 2 weeks, and I've been here 5, and I can tell you exactly why, if you want to hear it." Jonas said, "I'm listening." "Because this is the first place I've been where the work felt like it meant something beyond getting done," Levi said. "And because your daughter is the first person I've met in 8 years who said something true to me without needing anything back for it." He paused. "I can't promise you I won't die in a river crossing or a fence accident or any other way the frontier finds to take a man. Nobody can promise you that. But I can promise you I'm not leaving because I'm afraid anymore." Daniel said their father stood there for another long moment, and then he uncrossed his arms, which Daniel had apparently found significant enough to mention specifically, and said, "Make sure the east trough is topped off before sundown," and walked out of the barn. "What does that mean?" Cora asked when Daniel finished telling her. "It means he didn't say no," Daniel said. "For Dad, that's about as close to yes as you get, Wob." The rain started 3 days later. It came in from the northwest, which was the direction that usually meant business in the hill country. Not the soft southern rains that moved through quick and left the air clean, but the long northwest systems that settled in and stayed. The creek rose by mid-morning. By afternoon, it had crossed into the lower pasture, and the bluebonnets were standing in 3 inches of moving water, still blue, still upright, with the stubborn persistence of things that had survived this before. Levi moved the south cattle to the high pasture without being asked. He and Daniel spent the afternoon checking every low point on the property, and Jonas rode with them for the last 2 hours without commenting on it, which was its own kind of statement. Cora and May spent the afternoon in the house watching the rain come down in sheets and doing the indoor work that accumulated in wet weather. The mending, the accounts, the bread that didn't get made during good weather weeks when there was too much else to do. "It's going to keep going," May said, watching the window. "Could stop by morning." "Could," May said, with the particular tone of someone who thought it wouldn't. She was right. By morning the rain was still coming, and the creek was running higher than Cora had seen it since the year before Wesley died. She stood on the back porch in the early gray light and listened to the sound of it. The creek that was usually a low, steady voice had become something louder and more urgent, the sound of water that had decided it didn't need to stay in its banks. Levi was already at the barn. She found him assessing the situation with Jonas and Daniel, the 3 of them standing in the barn doorway looking south toward where the creek line had been, and now was not, exactly, because the water had pushed past it overnight. "South fence is going to go," Levi said. "Maybe already has. The post I was worried about last week is in 6 inches of water." "Cattle," Jonas said. "High pasture, all of them. Daniel and I moved the last of them yesterday before dark." Jonas looked out at the rain. "What about the Henner property on the south side?" The Henner property, an old homestead that had been vacant for 2 years since old Thomas Henner died without an heir, sat at the lowest point of the valley south of the Ashford land, and everyone in the county knew that the creek ran through its northwest corner, and that, in serious flood years, it became the first place the water went looking for new territory. "If the fence goes, the south herd could drift toward it," Daniel said. "There's no barrier." "The fence won't go before this afternoon," Levi said. "The post might lean, but it'll hold that long." "You sound certain." "I'm not certain. I'm betting," Levi said. "There's a difference, and it's worth knowing which one it is." Jonas looked at him, not unfavorably. "I'll go check the south fence line," Levi said. "Make sure. Take Daniel." "I'll go faster alone." "Then take Daniel so there's someone to come back and tell us what happened if faster alone turns out to be a bad idea." Jonas said it without inflection, but there was something in it, not quite dry humor but adjacent to it, that Cora hadn't heard from her father in a long time. Levi looked at him for half a second, then nodded. "Fair enough." No. They were gone 2 hours. Cora spent those 2 hours doing things that needed doing and trying not to count the time, with limited success on the second part. May had the good sense not to comment on the fact that Cora found reasons to check the south window at least 4 times in the first hour. When they came back, Levi was soaked through, and Daniel had mud to his knees, and they were both moving with the focused energy of men who had done what needed doing and were now processing the fact that it had been harder than expected. "Fence is holding," Daniel reported, pulling his boots off at the back door. "Barely. One more good push from the creek and it goes." "How long?" Jonas asked. "If the rain stops tonight, it'll hold. If it doesn't..." Daniel looked at Levi. "Tomorrow morning," Levi said. "If it keeps raining." Jonas looked at the sky. The sky did not offer any useful opinion. "Watch it tonight," Jonas said. "If it goes, I need to know before dawn." "I'll check it at midnight," Levi said. "I'll go with you," Daniel said. You'll go to sleep, Levi said. One of us should be rested tomorrow. Daniel started to argue and then looked at Cora for some reason, which she found both inexplicable and slightly irritating, and then he went inside to change. Levi stood at the back porch rail, wringing water out of his hat brim, with the practical efficiency of a man who has been wet enough times that he doesn't bother being annoyed by it anymore. He looked tired in a real way, not dramatically, just the ordinary bone tiredness of someone who had been working in the rain for 2 hours. You should eat something, Cora said. I will. Not eventually. Now. He looked at her, a brief, considering look. Yes, ma'am, he said, and almost smiled. She went inside and made him eat, which he did without ceremony, sitting at the kitchen table with his wet jacket hung over the chair back and his hair still damp, working through a plate of cornbread and leftover beans with the single-minded focus of a man fueling himself rather than enjoying a meal. She sat across from him with her coffee and didn't say much, and he didn't say much back. And it was the most ordinary thing, just two people sitting at a table in a farmhouse while the rain came down. And there was something about the ordinariness of it that felt like more than any particular conversation they'd had. When he was done, he said thank you and went to check the water trough levels, and Cora sat at the table after he left and looked at the plate and thought about the word ordinary and what it would mean to want it. The rain stopped, briefly, in the late afternoon, just long enough to fool everyone. The sky went a pale, washed-out gray, and the sound of rain disappeared, and Jonas said it might be done, and May hung some things out on the line, and Daniel went to check the fence situation in the lower pasture, and Levi went with him, and for about 2 hours there was a tentative quality to the evening, like a crowd that had been told the danger had passed and was beginning to believe it. Then, around 8 in the evening, the sky in the northwest went the color of an old bruise. That's not over, Jonas said. He was standing on the front porch looking northwest. Cora stood beside him. The air smelled of rain again. That particular electric smell that came ahead of serious weather, not the mild dampness of regular rain, but something sharper, something that made the horses restless. Where are Daniel and Levi? Cora said. Still at the south pasture, last I knew. She looked northwest. The cloud line was moving faster than it had any right to. I'll send Jake, Jonas said. Jake's already gone home. He looked at her. Then he looked at the sky. I'll go myself. You'll go on that knee? His left knee had been giving him trouble for 2 weeks. A fall from a horse 6 years ago that had never fully healed, and that always worsened in wet weather. Jonas said nothing, which was its own answer. I'll go, Cora said. Cora, I know where the south pasture is. I've known since I was 8. She was already moving toward the barn. Light the lamp on the back porch so they can find the house. She heard him say her name again, but she was already saddling her horse, and she could feel the wind picking up, and the sky to the northwest had gone from bruise-colored to nearly black in the time it took her to cross the yard. She rode south through what was left of the late light. The creek was already audible before she could see it. That sound she'd heard before. The loud, decided sound of water with more volume behind it than the banks were built for. She pushed her horse faster along the fence line and came over the small rise that gave a view of the south pasture. What she saw stopped her. The creek had come over its banks, not just edging over, fully over, running in a sheet across the low end of the south pasture, and the fence she could see from here was not leaning, it was gone. And in the rushing brown water near where the fence had been, she could see Daniel. He was in the water. Not swimming, he was on his horse, but the horse was struggling. The water was higher than a horse should be pushed into, and the current was moving fast, and Daniel was yelling something she couldn't hear over the roar of the creek. Her heart stopped. Then she saw Levi. He was on the bank, the near bank, the high side, and he was already unwinding the rope from his saddle with the fast, deliberate movements of a man who had assessed the situation and moved directly past the part where you panic and into the part where you act. His horse was the calmer of the two in the water noise, a steady gray that held while Levi worked. "Levi!" Cora screamed. He looked up once, 1 second, and then he looked back at the water and finished with the rope and tied one end around his saddle horn. Daniel's horse went under for a moment, just enough for Cora's stomach to drop completely through the earth. Then it came back up, Daniel still on it, But the current had them now, and they were moving south, away from the bank, into the deeper water where the creek had broken through, and Cora could see Daniel trying to turn the horse's head and the horse not turning. Levi rode into the water. Not recklessly. There was nothing reckless about it. He had the rope tied, he had a horse that would respond, and he rode in at an angle, upstream of Daniel, reading the current the way a man reads something he's studied. His gray gelding didn't want to go, and he pushed it anyway, firm and decisive, the kind of riding that doesn't argue with the animal, but doesn't give it a choice either. The water was at Levi's stirrups, then at his thighs, then higher than that, and Cora pressed her hand over her mouth and held very still, because screaming would not help, and she knew it, and she was very afraid, and that was also something she knew, and she kept her eyes on Levi and didn't look away. He reached Daniel. She saw him throw the rope. It caught barely, Daniel grabbing it with both hands and looping it once around himself in the way she'd seen cowboys work a steer, and then Levi turned the gray, and the horse lunged toward shore, and the rope went taut, and the current pulled against all of it, and for a terrible 4 or 5 seconds nothing moved, and everything in that stretch of water was balanced between two outcomes, and Cora couldn't breathe. Then Daniel's horse found its footing, not all at once. It scrambled, went sideways, found something solid and pushed off it, and the two horses moved toward shore together with the rope still taut between them, and the current still pushing, and Levi leaning forward on the gray's neck talking to him. Cora could see it, though she couldn't hear it, just a man and his horse in moving water, negotiating. They came out on the bank. Daniel fell off his horse the moment they were clear of the water. Not dramatically, just his legs gave out and he sat down hard in the mud, and his horse stood over him blowing hard, and Levi dismounted and crouched next to him and said something Cora couldn't hear, and Daniel nodded. Cora rode to them as fast as she could without killing her own horse on the wet ground. She reached them and was off her horse before it fully stopped, which was not something she'd done since she was 17, and she dropped down next to Daniel and grabbed his arm. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine," Daniel said. His voice was shaking. "I'm fine, the fence was already down and I went in to check the post and the current—" He stopped. His face was white under the mud and the wet. "The current was faster than it looked." "It always is," Levi said. He was still crouched next to Daniel, checking him over with quick, practical hands. Not panicked, just methodical. "Can you stand?" "Yeah." Daniel stood, his legs held. "Yeah, I'm okay." Levi stood too. He was soaked to the skin. His hat was gone, so somewhere in the creek, gone with the current. His face was closed down in the particular way that meant he was holding something together by willpower rather than ease. His hands were steady. His hands were completely steady, which told Cora more about what those hands had cost him to keep steady than steadiness alone would have. She looked at him. She didn't say thank you. The words felt like the wrong size for what had just happened. She just looked at him, and he looked back at her. And there was something in those 4 seconds that she could not have put into words, but that landed in her chest with the weight of something permanent. Then he looked away, at the creek that was still running high and loud and brown behind them. "We need to get back before it gets dark," he said. "The ground's going to be worse in an hour." "Levi," she said. He looked back. "You went in for him," she said. "Yes," he said, simply, not as if it required any particular acknowledgement. "You could have—" She stopped. He looked at her steadily. "I know," he said. "Same as your Wesley did. I know." His voice was quiet and direct and not defensive. "There's no promise I can make you about Rivers. I told your father that, and I'm telling you, but I didn't think about not going in. I want you to know that. It wasn't a decision I made. It was just the thing that needed doing." The rain started again. Soft at first, then steadier, and the northwest sky was dark now, and what light was left was going fast, and Cora stood in the mud next to a flooded creek, with her heart still pounding, and looked at this man she had known for 5 weeks. This man with no hat now, and his hair plastered flat and water running off his jacket, and felt something happen in her chest that she did not have the language for yet, but that she recognized, the way you recognize a road you've been on before, even when you weren't sure you'd ever be on it again. Daniel had gotten back on his horse. "Cora," he said, "we should go." "I know," she said. She got back on her horse. The three of them rode north through the rain and the dark, and behind them the creek ran full and fast and indifferent, the way it always had, the way it had the night Wesley went in, the way it would for another 100 years after all of them were gone. Rivers were just rivers. They didn't have an opinion about you, but the people who stood on their banks did, and Cora rode through the rain knowing something she hadn't known that morning, knowing it the way you know things that arrive through the body before the mind catches up, heavy and clear, and without the faintest possibility of being taken back. Her father was standing on the back porch when they came in. He saw Daniel first, soaked and muddy and shaken and alive, and something passed through Jonas Ashford's face that was not something he would ever put words to and that Cora had only seen there twice before in her life. Then he looked at Levi, just looked at him. In the rain, on the gray horse without a hat. Nobody said anything. Jonas went inside. But he left the back door open behind him, which was an invitation, or as close to one as he knew how to make, and Cora watched Levi see it. The small narrowing of his eyes, the recognition, and watched him lead his horse to the barn without comment, and understood that something had shifted between those two men in the dark and the rain, in the space between a closed door and an open one, as quietly and irreversibly as floodwater finding new ground. The rain stopped before dawn. Cora knew because she heard it stop. She heard it stop, the way you only hear silence when it replaces something loud. She had been lying awake for most of the night listening to the creek and to the rain on the roof and to her own thoughts, which had not been organized or useful, but which had been persistent, the way thoughts are at 3 a.m. when you're trying not to think about something specific, and everything you try to think about instead loops back to the same place. She got up and went to the window. The yard was pale and still in the pre-dawn gray. The puddles caught what little light there was. The barn was dark. The bunkhouse had no lamp burning, which meant Levi was either asleep or lying in the dark as she was, and she stood there for a moment considering the fact that she was standing at a window at 4 a.m, looking at a bunkhouse and trying to determine which of those two things was true. She went back to bed. She didn't sleep. By first light, she was dressed and downstairs, and the kitchen was cold because the fire had gone out overnight, and she rebuilt it with the efficiency of someone who had done it 10,000 times and whose hands knew the task without the mind needing to be involved. She got the coffee going and stood at the back window and looked at the yard in the early light. The south pasture was still flooded. She could see the water line from here, a dark edge against the lighter ground, marking how far the creek had come before it stopped. The bluebonnets in the lower field were flattened, most of them. Some would come back up. Some wouldn't. She heard boots on the bunkhouse step. Levi came across the yard without his hat. She'd forgotten, for a moment, that his hat was gone, somewhere in the creek. And he moved with the slightly careful gait of a man whose body had logged what yesterday had cost, and was presenting the bill. Not limping, just moving the way people move when they're tired in the specific way that sleep doesn't fully fix. He saw her through the window and raised a hand. She raised one back. He came to the back door and knocked once, which struck her as oddly formal given everything, and she opened it. "Coffee's ready," she said. "I was going to check the south fence." "Drink coffee first. The fence will still be broken in 10 minutes. He came in. He sat at the kitchen table and she poured 2 cups and sat across from him, and they were quiet for a while in the way they had been quiet before, except that this quiet was different from the earlier ones. The earlier silences had been comfortable in the way of 2 people discovering they could share space without filling it. This one had weight to it, the weight of yesterday, of the creek and the rope, and the 4 seconds they'd looked at each other on the bank that neither of them had addressed, and both of them knew had happened. "How's your shoulder?" she asked. He looked at her. "How did you know about my shoulder?" "Daniel mentioned you hit the saddle horn when you turned the gray back to shore." "Daniel talks too much." "Daniel talks exactly the right amount. It's everyone else who talks too little." She looked at him steadily. "How's your shoulder?" "Sore," he said. "It's fine. Nothing's broken." "Did you check?" "I've had broken things before. I know what they feel like." That's not an answer. He wrapped his hands around the coffee cup. His knuckles were scraped. She hadn't noticed that last night, in the rain and the dark. Just raw patches across 2 knuckles on his right hand where something had caught him. "The rope," he said when he noticed her looking. It ran through fast when I tied it off. Occupational hazard. She got up and found the tin of salve May kept in the cabinet beside the stove, the one with comfrey and beeswax that their mother had made and that May had been making by the same recipe ever since, and she set it on the table in front of him without saying anything. He looked at it. "You don't have to," he started. "I know I don't." She sat back down. He opened the tin. He applied it himself, which she had expected. He was not the kind of man who let people fuss over him, which she had understood from early on. But he used it, which was something, and she drank her coffee and watched the yard get lighter, and didn't make anything out of it. "I thought about not going in," he said. She looked at him. "Yesterday," he said, "I told you I didn't think about it, and that was mostly true. But there was half a second before I started moving." He looked at his hands. "Half a second where I thought about the creek and what it had taken before and what it could take again." He paused. "And then I went in anyway. But I want you to know there was a half second." Cora set her cup down. "Why do you want me to know that?" she said. "Because I don't want you thinking I'm someone I'm not," he said. "I'm not a man who doesn't feel fear. I feel it fine. I just didn't let it make the decision yesterday." He looked at her. "There's a difference between brave and unafraid. I want to be clear about which one I am." She looked at him for a long moment. "I know the difference," she said quietly. "I've known it for 3 years." He nodded once. The kitchen filled up slowly with morning light, and the coffee went from hot to warm, and outside the yard dried imperceptibly in the way wet things dry after a long rain. Not all at once, but in the particular patient way of things that take the time they take. Daniel came down an hour later looking significantly more recovered than he had any right to be, which was the particular resilience of a 19-year-old body that Cora found both enviable and slightly annoying. He dropped into a chair, pulled the coffee toward him, and looked at Levi. "I didn't say thank you," he said. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I want to." Daniel looked at him directly, with the uncomplicated directness that Cora had always either admired or found exasperating depending on the situation. "You didn't have to go in after me. You didn't have to go check the fence in a flood. That's different." "Is it?" Daniel considered this. "Maybe not," he said. "Still, thank you." Levi accepted this with a slight nod and didn't expand on it, which Daniel apparently found satisfactory because he moved on to the subject of breakfast with the ease of someone who had said the important thing and was now ready to return to normal business. Jonas came down at 7. He was dressed for work, which for Jonas Ashford meant dressed exactly as he always was, because he did not have a mode that wasn't work. And he stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment looking at the 3 of them at the table. Then he came in and poured his coffee and sat at the head of the table. "South fence?" he said. "Still down," Levi said. "I'll check the extent of the damage this morning. The posts that were already weak are going to need replacement, not repair." "How many?" 3 at minimum, maybe 4. Jonas drank his coffee. "Materials are in the equipment barn. Take what you need." Levi nodded. Jonas looked at Daniel, a long look, the kind of look that communicated 3 things at once without saying any of them. Daniel received it with the slight squirming expression of a son who knows he is being assessed and found both worrying and acceptable in the same moment. "You're all right," Jonas said. "It wasn't a question." "Yes, sir," Jonas nodded. He went back to his coffee. And that was the entirety of what Jonas Ashford said about the flood and the creek and his son nearly being taken by it, which was exactly the right amount for a man like him, and everyone at the table understood that. The conversation that changed things happened 4 days later. The flood had receded by then. Not entirely, the south pasture still had standing water in the low spots, but the creek was back in its banks, and the sky had been clear for 2 days, and the world was reasserting its ordinary character with the particular relief of something that has been tested and held. Cora was in the equipment barn sorting through the post materials, taking inventory of what had been used and what needed to be ordered before the summer, when her father came in. He didn't announce himself. He just came in and stood near the door and looked at her working, and after a moment she turned because she heard his breathing, and she'd known the sound of her father's breathing her whole life. "Dad." "Your mother would have liked him," Jonas said. Cora went still. Her father was not looking at her. He was looking at a point somewhere between the wall and the middle distance, the way he looked when he was saying something he'd had inside for a while and needed to release without fully facing. She liked people who were exactly what they were, he said. No more, no less. She had no patience for performance. He paused. Levi Hartwell is exactly what he is. Cora set down the inventory list. I know, she said. I was wrong, Jonas said. He said it the way he said most things, directly and without preamble. But it cost him, she could see that, in the particular set of his jaw. Not about caring. I'll never be wrong about caring, but about how I went about it. You drove him off at dawn before breakfast. I did. In front of me. Yes. He was quiet. Your mother would have had words for me about that. She would have had entire sentences, Cora said, and something in her voice must have been close to her mother's because Jonas almost smiled. The small, private, involuntary smile that only appeared when he was thinking about his wife and forgot for a moment to hold it back. I watched Wesley drown in that river, Jonas said. The smile was gone. I was on the bank. I couldn't get to him in time, and I watched it happen, and I carried that home, and I sat with it, and I decided that I would not stand on another bank and watch another person my daughter loved go into that water. His voice was steady, but barely. And then 4 days ago I stood on my own back porch and watched Levi Hartwell ride into the same creek. And he came back, Cora said quietly. And he came back, Jonas said. With your brother. He looked at her finally. I know what that took. I'm not a man who doesn't understand courage. I just spent 3 years deciding that courage wasn't worth the cost. He paused. I think I was wrong about that too. Cora crossed the equipment barn and stood next to her father, and they looked at the wall together, which was how the Ashford family had always had their most important conversations, side by side rather than face to face, as if the direct approach to hard things was too bright to look at straight. I'm not going to tell you what I feel, she said, because I'm still figuring it out, and you'll turn it into something to manage before I've finished working through it. That's fair, he said. But I want you to stop making decisions for me based on what you're afraid of, she said. I understand why you do it. I'm not angry about why. I'm asking you to stop. He was quiet for a long time. I'll try, he said, which from Jonas Ashford was a significant promise. She nodded. They stood there for another moment, side by side in the equipment barn, with the smell of cedar and motor oil and old rope around them. He needs a new hat, Jonas said. Cora looked at him. His went in the creek, Jonas said. A man can't work a ranch without a hat. He walked back toward the door. There's a spare in the tack room, the gray one. It was your grandfather's. Size might be close enough. He left. Cora stood in the equipment barn for a while after he was gone, holding the inventory list she'd forgotten she was holding, thinking about her grandfather's gray hat and what it meant that her father knew which hat was in the tack room and had decided, in the plain practical language of a rancher from West Texas, to offer it. She gave Levi the hat that afternoon. She found him at the south fence. He'd been working it since morning, 3 new posts already set, the 4th going in, and she walked out with the hat and held it out without explanation. He looked at it. My grandfather's, she said. Dad thought the size might be close. He took it. He turned it over once, looking at it, and then he put it on. It was slightly large, but not unwearably so, the kind of fit that would settle with time. Tell him thank you, Levi said. Tell him yourself. He looked at her. He's trying, she said. Meet him somewhere in the middle. Levi looked back at the fence line. He put his hand on the new post and pushed, testing the set. It didn't move. I can do that, he said. She stood next to the fence for a while, not helping and not leaving, which was a thing she'd been doing more of lately, just being present in the same space without needing it to be anything. He worked and she watched, and the afternoon was warm and clear, and the south pasture smelled of wet earth drying, and somewhere in the distance the creek ran at its ordinary level, quiet and ordinary, like something that hadn't nearly taken 2 people less than a week ago. Levi, she said. Yeah. When you went into the water, she said, before you did it, in that half second you told me about. He kept working. Yeah. What did you think about? He was quiet for a moment, driving the wire staple into the new post with 2 clean strikes. "Cal," he said. She waited. "I thought, if it had been someone on that bank when Cal went and they'd gone in after him." He stopped. Reset. "I thought about all the ways the story could have been different if someone had gone in." He looked at her. "And then I stopped thinking and went." Cora looked at the fence post he'd just set. Solid, plumb, driven deep into the wet ground. "I'm glad you went," she said. "I know," he said. "I know you are. I'm also—" She stopped, started again. "I was terrified. I know that too. When I saw you in the water, She put her hand on the fence rail. The wire was cold under her fingers. "I knew. In the water, looking at you, I knew what I'd been pretending I didn't know." He put down the wire tool. He turned to face her. He didn't say anything. "I'm telling you that," she said, "not because I expect anything from it, and not because I want to make it into something we have to figure out right now. I'm telling you because you asked me to be honest with you on that porch weeks ago, and I promised myself I would be, and I'm keeping the promise." Levi looked at her for a long moment. The afternoon light was on his face, and the gray hat sat slightly large on his head, and there was a streak of red clay on his forearm from the postwork, and he was not, at this moment, a man who looked like anything from a story. He looked like a tired person with dirty hands standing at a fence on a Tuesday afternoon in the Texas Hill Country, which was exactly what he was, and she was looking at him like he was exactly that. "When Cal died," he said finally, "I stopped believing I was owed a future, not as a punishment, just as a—" he worked for the word, "as a fact, like the future was a thing other people had and I'd used mine up wrong." He looked at the fence. "I've been working on that for 8 years. Are you still working on it?" "Some days." He met her eyes. "Less than I was." She nodded. "I'm not asking you to promise me anything," she said. "I'm not asking you to stay, or to be something, or to make any decision you're not ready for. I'm just—" She exhaled. "I'm just not going to pretend I didn't see what I saw in that water." "All right," he said. "All right. All right." He picked up the wire tool again. "I'm not going to pretend either." He looked at her once more, directly, and what was in the look was plain and uncomplicated, and neither of them needed to name it. "But I'd rather tell you the rest of it not standing at a fence with clay on my hands." "Tonight," she said. "Porch." "Tonight," he said. She walked back toward the house, and she did not look back, which cost her something, and she went into the kitchen and stood at the window over the wash basin and watched him go back to work. And May came in and looked at her, and then looked at the window, and then looked at her again. "Don't," Cora said. "I didn't say anything," May said. "You were about to." "I was going to say supper's in an hour," May said, with the serene expression of a woman who was saying one thing and meaning several others. Hulk. That evening, Jonas Ashford did something that no one at the table had seen him do in 3 years. He asked Levi a question about himself. Not about the ranch, not about the work, not the functional transaction of an employer extracting necessary information. An actual question, the kind you asked when you were interested in the answer for its own sake. "Where were you before New Mexico?" Jonas said. It came out during a gap in the supper conversation, set down carefully in the silence the way you set something fragile on an unsteady surface. Everyone at the table noticed. Daniel looked at his plate. May became suddenly interested in her biscuit. Levi looked at Jonas, clearly registering the shift in the room. "Colorado," he said. "Before that, Wyoming. I started north and worked my way south." He paused. "I grew up in Missouri, outside St. Joseph. On a farm, not a ranch. Didn't ride a horse properly until I was 16. "Late start," Jonas said. "Made up for it since." Jonas ate. A pause. "Your family still in Missouri?" "My parents died when I was in my 20s. Fever, winter of 74. My sister married a man in Kansas City. We write sometimes." Another pause. "Cal was the last one I was close to." The table held this for a moment. "I'm sorry about your brother," Jonas said. He said it plainly, without the careful management of a man offering condolence as social courtesy. He said it the way a man says it who knows exactly what that sentence contains. Levi looked at him. "Thank you," he said, the same plain way. Daniel and May exchanged a glance that lasted exactly as long as it needed to, and then the conversation moved on to the fence repair, and the cattle count, and what needed doing before the next wet weather system came through. And the rest of supper was ordinary in the easy, working way of people who share a table regularly and have run out of the need to perform for each other. But after supper, when Jonas went to his study, and Daniel went to write a letter, and May went to read, Cora was washing the dishes when she heard a knock at the study door. Not her knock, a different one. And then Levi's voice saying, "Mr. Ashford, you got a minute?" She stood very still at the wash basin. She heard her father say yes. She heard the study door close. She washed dishes she could not have told you anything about and waited. 20 minutes later, she heard the study door open again and Levi's boots on the floorboards going toward the back door, and then the back door opening and closing, and then silence. She dried her hands. She knocked on the study door. "Come in," Jonas said. He was at his desk. He had the account book open, but he wasn't looking at it. He was looking at the middle distance with the expression he sometimes had when he was processing something that hadn't fully landed yet. "Well?" she said. "He asked my permission," Jonas said. Cora went still. "He said he knew I might say no," Jonas said. "He said he would respect it if I did, and that he wasn't going to push against my wishes on my own property. And then he told me that he intended to court you properly, if you were willing, and that he wasn't going to do it without telling me first." He paused. He said he'd come to understand that I was a man who needed to be told things directly, and he was trying to oblige me. Cora exhaled slowly. "What did you say?" she asked. Jonas looked at her. "I said the same thing I've been saying since he got here," Jonas said. "That I couldn't promise he wouldn't break your heart. That I couldn't promise the frontier wouldn't take him the same way it took Wesley." He closed the account book. And he said he couldn't promise that either. He said the only thing he could promise was that he was done running from places that mattered to him. Her father looked at his hands, the scarred, weathered hands that had built this ranch and buried his wife, and watched his daughter break and watched her put herself back together. "And I believe him." "You believe him," Cora said softly. "I do." Jonas looked up. "I'm not happy about it. I want you to know that. I'm not a man who lets go of things easily, and the things I'm letting go of here are things I held on to for 3 years, and that's not nothing." His jaw tightened. "But I believe him, and you haven't—" He stopped. "You haven't looked the way you've looked these past weeks since before Wesley, and I would have to be a very selfish man not to see that." Cora's throat tightened completely. She crossed the study and did something she had not done since her mother's funeral. She put her arms around her father. Not the brief sideways hug of family habit. A real one. He was stiff for a moment, the way he always was, with sudden affection, and then he put one arm around her and held on. "He needs to fix the east water line before he thinks about anything else," Jonas said into her hair. She laughed. It came out slightly broken at the edges. "I'll tell him. And the barn door hinge has been wrong since March." "Dad, I'm just saying, court all he wants. The hinge still needs doing." She stepped back and looked at him. His eyes were bright in a way she hadn't seen in a long time. Not wet, Jonas Ashford did not cry, but bright, the way eyes get when something long compressed finds a little room. "Thank you," she said. He waved his hand in the way that meant don't make it into a thing, and picked up the account book and opened it again, and she understood she was dismissed, which was fine, which was exactly her father, and she went out of his study with her heart feeling 3 sizes larger than it had going in. The back porch. The night was warm, warmer than it had been all spring, the kind of night that was practicing being summer, just to see how it fit. The creek was quiet. The stars were out. The yard smelled of wet earth and cedar and the particular after-rain smell of Texas limestone drying in warm air. Levi was already on the steps. No hat. He'd left it in the bunkhouse. His hair was slightly damp, like he'd cleaned up before coming out, which she noticed and didn't comment on. He had his hands around a cup of coffee, and he was looking at the yard with the patient expression of a man who was thinking carefully about what he was about to say. She sat on the step beside him. Not the far end. Beside him. He looked at her. "He told you," Levi said. "He told me." "I should have talked to you first," he said, "before going to him. I thought about it and decided he needed—" "You were right," she said. "He needed it, and you knew that because you've been paying attention for 2 months." She looked at him. "Most people don't pay that kind of attention." He was quiet. "I need to tell you something," he said, "before this goes further." "All right. I'm not built the way Wesley was built," he said. "I know I keep getting compared to him, and I'm not saying the comparisons are wrong. I understand why your father sees what he sees. But I'm not easy. I don't come easy. I'm going to be wrong about things, and I'm going to default to leaving when things get hard, even if I've decided not to. Even if I'm fighting that, it's the reflex, and reflex doesn't go away just because you decide it should." "I know," she said. "I'm going to need to be told when I'm doing it. I might not see it." "Levi," she said, "I'm serious. I've been alone enough years that I don't always, Levi." She said it more firmly. He stopped. "I'm not looking for easy," she said. "Easy was a thing I thought I wanted at 22. I'm 26 now, and I know what I'm looking for, and it's not easy. It's honest." She met his eyes. "Are you honest?" "Yes," he said, without hesitation. "Then we can work with the rest." He looked at her for a long moment, not the careful, measured attention he usually offered, something more exposed than that, like a man who had dropped something he'd been carrying and was looking at it on the ground. "I haven't built anything in 8 years," he said. "Not a garden, not a—" He stopped. "Not anything I had to stay for. I stopped letting myself." "I know. I want to," he said. "That's what I'm telling you. I want to, and I'm afraid of it, and I'm not going to let the afraid win anymore." He paused. "That's what I can offer you. Not a guarantee, just a decision." Cora looked at this man, this complicated, careful, damage-carrying man sitting on her father's porch steps with her grandfather's hat inside and her grandfather's history settling around him and his knuckles still scraped from the rope that pulled her brother from the water. "That's enough," she said. "That's more than enough." He reached over and took her hand. Not dramatically, just reached over and picked it up the way you pick up something you've decided belongs there, and held it. His hand was warm and rough, and nothing about it was graceful. It was just a hand. It was just 2 people sitting on a porch in the Texas hill country on a warm May night with the creek running quiet and the stars out in their thousands, and the cedar trunk upstairs with the pale green dress folded inside it. They sat like that for a long time. "The east water line," Cora said eventually. "What about it?" "Dad says it needs fixing." Levi was quiet for a moment. "I know. I've been planning to get to it." He mentioned it specifically. She kept her eyes on the yard. Tonight, she felt him understand the weight of that, the fact that her father had said it, the particular meaning of Jonas Ashford mentioning a repair task in that context, in that conversation, immediately after being asked for his blessing. "I'll get to it tomorrow," Levi said. "And the barn door hinge." He turned to look at her. "March," she said. He looked back at the yard. And then, quietly, without fanfare, in the plain, unceremonious way he did most things, he laughed. A real laugh, not performed, not careful, just the actual sound of a man who had been surprised into finding something funny when he hadn't expected to find anything. It was the most unguarded she had heard him. It lasted only a few seconds, and then it settled back into a smile that he didn't bother to hide, and she thought, not for the first time, but for the first time with this particular clarity, that he had a good face when he forgot to manage it. "All right," he said. "All right," she said. He kept her hand. Inside the house, Jonas Ashford's study light burned for another hour before going dark. In the room above the kitchen, May sat by her window with her book open and unread on her lap, looking at the back porch with an expression she would deny having if anyone asked. Daniel had fallen asleep with his boots on, which he did at least twice a week, and which said something reliable about his character. The creek ran in the dark, ordinary and steady, saying nothing about what it had done last week, the way water does. Indifferent to its own history, always moving, never holding on to what it's passed through. The night held its warmth. The stars held their ground. And on the back porch steps, Cora Ashford sat with her hand in Levi Hartwell's and felt, for the first time in 3 years, that the future was not a foreign country she was being asked to travel to without a map. It was just the next day, and the one after that, and the one after that. Built, as everything real is built, not all at once, but one day at a time, by people who are not perfect and who stay anyway. The east water line took Levi 4 days to fix properly. He could have done it in 2, but he found the problem went deeper than the surface break. The pipe had been laid wrong at the joint, a slow fault that had been weakening for years before it finally gave. And fixing just the visible crack would have meant fixing it again in 6 months. So he dug it out to the source and did it right, which was the way he did most things. And Jonas watched him do it on the second day without saying anything, and on the third day brought him coffee without being asked, which was the closest Jonas Ashford came to a standing ovation. The barn door hinge he fixed in an afternoon. He didn't announce it, he just fixed it, and the next morning when Jonas swung the barn door open and it moved smoothly on true hardware for the first time since March, he stood there for a moment holding the door, and then he let it swing closed and went about his work without comment. But that evening at supper he told Daniel that the barn door had been sticking because someone had installed the hinge plate with the wrong gauge screw, and he set it in Levi's direction without quite looking at him, and Levi said, "I noticed that." And Jonas said, "Good eye." And May had to look at her plate. What grew between those two men over the following weeks was not friendship exactly. It was something more functional and in some ways more durable than friendship. The mutual respect of two people who have assessed each other honestly and found the assessment acceptable, built not on liking, but on recognition. Jonas recognized in Levi a man who did not cut corners, and did not perform and did not require management. Levi recognized in Jonas a man whose hardness came from love rather than coldness, which was a distinction that mattered enormously and that not everyone could see. They were not warm with each other. They probably never would be. But they were honest, and in the Texas Hill Country in the spring of 1886, honesty between two men who had reason to be otherwise was worth more than warmth. Cora and Levi's courtship was not a romantic thing, in the way that word usually gets used. There were no grand gestures. There were no declarations made on horseback against a sunset. What there was instead was daily life, shared, the ordinary accumulating texture of two people who had decided to stop keeping each other at arm's length and were now finding out what it meant to let someone into the regular hours of a day. He brought her coffee in the mornings when he came in from the early barn check. Not every morning. Some mornings he was already deep in something before the house was up, but often enough that she started leaving his cup on the counter when she made hers. She didn't make anything of it, and neither did he. It was just coffee. It was just a cup set out for someone because you knew they'd want it, and that kind of knowing is its own quiet language. They rode together on Sundays, which became a habit without either of them deciding it should be one. Not anywhere particular, not on any schedule, just out, along the fence lines or up to the ridge or down to where the creek ran shallow and clear over limestone in dry weather. They talked about small things, and occasionally large ones, and they were quiet when the talking ran out, and neither of them forced it. He told her about Missouri, the farm, his father who was a serious man with a gift for growing corn, but no gift for saying what he felt, his mother who had compensated by saying everything she felt constantly, with a volume that Levi had as a boy found exhausting and as a man missed like a missing limb. He told her about Cal, more than he'd told her before, not just the death, but the life, the way Cal had laughed, the argument they'd had 2 weeks before the accident about something so minor he couldn't even remember what it was now. Just the argument, just the fact of it, unresolved. "That's the one that gets me," he said one Sunday, up on the ridge with the valley below them and the hill country spreading south in its limestone and cedar and particular blue-green color. "Not that he's gone. I've come to terms with that, as much as a person can. It's that stupid argument that I didn't go back and finish it." "What would you have said?" Cora asked. He thought about it for a while. "That he was right," he said. "Whatever it was about. I was probably wrong." "Were you usually wrong when you argued with him?" "About half the time," he said. "Same as anyone." He looked at the valley. "But I'd take being wrong in an argument over not having the argument." Cora understood that. She understood it in the specific way of someone who had her own version of it. Not an argument, but a conversation she'd never had with Wesley, a thing she'd been saving to tell him about her mother's illness that she'd kept back because she hadn't wanted to burden him, and that now she would never be able to say. Every person who has lost someone suddenly has at least one of those, the thing that didn't get said in time. "Tell me something you never told him," she said. "Something you were saving." He looked at her. "Tell me," she said. "He won't hear it, but you'll have said it. It doesn't have to go nowhere." Levi was quiet for a long time. A long time. The horses shifted under them, and the wind moved through the cedar, and the valley was enormous and still below. "I was proud of him," Levi said finally. "That's what I never said. He was better at most things than I was. Better with people, better with animals, steadier under pressure. I never told him that I knew that. I was his older brother, and I was supposed to be the one he looked up to, and I let him go on looking up to me when the truth was I was looking at him most of the time and thinking, there it is. That's what I'm trying to get to." His voice stayed level. Barely. Cora didn't say anything for a moment. "He knew," she said. "People always know." "Maybe." "Not maybe. He knew." She said it with the certainty of someone who has also been seen without being told. The people who love us always know, even when we don't say it. They just know. Levi looked at her. "Your mother knew you'd wear the dress again," he said. She hadn't expected that. It hit her somewhere below the sternum. Not painfully, but with the particular ache of something true. "Yes," she said. She did. They rode back down the ridge in the late afternoon light, and the horses were steady under them, and the valley came up to meet them, green and gold in the particular way of Texas hill country in early summer. And Cora thought about what it meant to tell the truth to someone, not because you needed them to respond, but because you needed the truth to exist somewhere outside of you, to have been said, to have a witness. That, she thought, was what she and Levi were becoming for each other. Not just partners, not just people who had found each other's loneliness compatible. Witnesses. The people who heard the things that had gone unsaid for too long and received them without making them into something that required fixing. That was rarer than love, she thought. Or maybe it was what love actually was, when you got underneath all the other definitions. Levi planted a garden in June. He didn't make an announcement about it. He just started one morning turning over a strip of ground along the south side of the equipment barn. Not the best spot, not the worst, decent drainage and good morning sun. And May found him at it and said, "What are you putting in?" And he said, "Tomatoes, if I can get the starts, beans, maybe squash." And May said, "There are starts in the root cellar from my planting. You can have some." And that was the whole of the conversation. But Cora noticed. She noticed because he had told her, on the porch weeks ago, the very first night they'd really talked, that he hadn't planted anything in 8 years. That he'd stopped growing things because growing things meant staying to see them come in. She didn't say anything to him about it. Some things were better witnessed quietly. He got the tomato starts from May and put them in on a Thursday, and she watched from the kitchen window, and she thought about what it cost a person to put something in the ground. The particular act of faith required to plant something and not be certain you'd be there when it came up, but to plant it anyway. It was a small thing. It was just a garden. But small things were how you knew what a person had decided. He asked her on an evening in late June. Not on the porch, not at sunset, not at any moment that could have been arranged for effect. He asked her in the kitchen while she was drying dishes, and he was sitting at the table writing a letter to his sister in Kansas City. The first letter he'd written since arriving, she knew, because he'd mentioned it and she'd noticed the pen and paper appearing on the table. He put the pen down and looked at her. "Cora." "I want to marry you." She stopped drying the dish. He said it the same way he said most things, directly, without build-up, without the anxious scaffolding of a man trying to construct the right moment. Just the plain fact of what he wanted, laid down like a post being set. "This is where I intend this to stand." She turned around. He was looking at her steadily. No performance, just the same clear, direct eyes she'd looked into on a porch in April when she'd asked if he was honest, and he'd said yes without hesitating. "You already asked my father," she said. "I asked his permission to court you," he said. "That was different. This is me asking you." He paused. "They're separate questions, and you're the one that matters." Her throat tightened. "Yes," she said. He exhaled, not dramatically, just the single exhale of a man who had been holding something carefully and was now setting it down. "All right," he said. "All right?" She stared at him. "That's what you have?" He almost smiled. "What would you like me to say?" "Something slightly more—" "You said yes in about 4 seconds flat," he said. "I'd say we're even." She threw the dish towel at him. He caught it, which meant he'd been expecting it, and he was smiling now, the full, unmanaged smile that he still didn't produce easily, but that when it appeared made his face into a different thing, younger and less careful and entirely itself. She crossed the kitchen and sat down across from him at the table, and they looked at each other across the plain wood surface in the ordinary kitchen light. Two people who had come to this through grief and stubbornness, and a long series of back porch conversations and one flood and one river and one cedar trunk and 20 years of other people's mistakes about what love required and what it cost. "Tell your sister," Cora said. "In the letter." He looked at the letter he'd been writing, then he picked up the pen and added something at the bottom, and she didn't read it, but she saw his hand moving and she knew he was telling her, and that mattered in a way she couldn't have explained to anyone who didn't understand what it meant to be the kind of person who kept things separate, who had been keeping things separate for so long that the act of putting them together felt both right and frightening and worth doing anyway. They told Jonas at supper, or rather Levi told Jonas because he felt it was the right way to do it, and Cora let him because she understood that he needed to, and because she had learned that some things between men required the direct path whether or not she thought it was strictly necessary. He said, "Mr. Ashford, I've asked your daughter to marry me, and she's said yes. I wanted you to hear it from me." Jonas put his fork down. He looked at Levi. He looked at Cora. He picked his fork back up. "When?" he said. "We haven't decided," Cora said. "The chapel," Jonas said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Cora said. Her father nodded once. He ate. The table was quiet in a way that wasn't uncomfortable, the particular quiet of people who have absorbed something significant and are giving it room. Then Daniel said, "Finally," and May kicked him under the table, and Jonas looked at both of them with the expression of a man who had been living with these two for 19 and 24 years, respectively, and had long since stopped being surprised by them. And Cora laughed, and even Levi laughed, and the kitchen filled with the sound of it, and outside the summer evening was warm, and the tomato plants in the garden by the equipment barn were already 6 inches high and climbing. They married in April, the following April, not because they needed a year, not because there was any practical reason for waiting, but because Cora wanted the bluebonnets. She wanted to be married when the lower pasture was blue and the hill country was at the particular version of itself that she had loved her whole life, before summer arrived and burned it golden and dry. Levi said, "Whatever you want," and meant it without reservation, which she found both touching and slightly suspicious, because he was not typically a man who said whatever you want without at least one counterpoint. "You don't want to wait a year," she said. "I want to marry you," he said. "The year is just time. I've got time." She thought about that, about the difference between waiting and having time, about how those two things had felt identical to her for 3 years, waiting out the grief, waiting until she was ready, waiting for the future to stop feeling foreign, and how they'd been nothing alike, actually. Waiting was passive, something you did to you. Having time was something else. It was something you held in your hands and decided what to build with. She had time. She was choosing to use it for bluebonnets. "April," she said. "April," he said. The morning of the wedding, Cora opened the cedar trunk alone. She had asked May to give her 20 minutes, which May had understood immediately and without question, because May always understood the things that didn't need explaining, which was one of the best things about her. The dress was there where it had always been. The cedar smell, the lavender, the particular quality of the light in her bedroom at that hour. Early, the sun just up, the room still cool and blue before the day's warmth arrived. She lifted the dress out and laid it on the bed and looked at it. Her mother's stitching at the bodice. Tiny and even and patient. Still perfect after 4 years, after all the folding and all the springs, after everything that had been layered on top of it. Cora sat on the edge of the bed. She had carried this dress through 4 years of grief, and one long winter, and one difficult spring, and a flood, and a back porch, and 100 ordinary days that had accumulated, somehow, into something she hadn't known she was building while she was building it. She had worn it once, alone among the bluebonnets, in the ritual she'd invented to keep her dead close because she didn't know another way. She had almost put it away for good more times than she could count. She picked up the small sewing kit on the bedside table. She had been thinking about this for weeks. Since December, really, since the morning she'd woken up knowing what she wanted to do. And she threaded the needle with the same pale green thread her mother had used, which she had ordered specially from the dry goods store in Millvale, which had required explaining to the store clerk that she needed a very specific color and would be happy to describe it 17 times until they found it. She found the spot on the bodice, just beside her mother's last stitch, where the seam turned at the hip. She made 3 stitches. Small and even, and not as patient as her mother's. Her hands were shaking slightly, which she acknowledged and worked through, but placed deliberately, intentionally, in the place she had chosen. Her stitches beside her mother's stitches, not covering them, not replacing them, beside them, continuing from the place where her mother had stopped. She sat with that for a moment, then she put the dress on. May cried when she saw her. "Don't," Cora said. "I'm not," May said, very clearly crying. "May." "It's the dress," May said, pressing her fingers under her eyes with the efficiency of a woman who had been crying at things her whole life and had developed practical methods. "Mom would be so—" She stopped. "She would be very smug about the stitching, actually. She'd say she knew you'd do it eventually." "She would," Cora said. She was usually right. Annoyingly, yes. May straightened Cora's collar. It didn't need straightening, but it was something to do with her hands, and stepped back and looked at her the way sisters look at each other on days like this, with the particular layered vision of people who have known each other from the beginning, who contain the whole history of each other's faces. "You look like yourself," May said. "That's the thing. You just look exactly like yourself." Cora looked in the mirror. She did. That was the thing she always forgot, and that she hoped, this time, she'd remember. That wearing this dress didn't turn her into something from the past or something from a future she was trying to manufacture. It just made her look like herself. Cora Ashford, 27 years old, in a pale green dress with her mother's stitching, and her own beside it, ready for the next ordinary day. Jonas walked her across the pasture to the chapel. The bluebonnets were at their fullest. The lower field completely blue, the ridgeline hazed with it, the hill country in the particular April mood that made you understand why people stayed here and endured the rest of it just for this. The morning was clear and warm enough, and a light wind came from the south, and Cora walked through the bluebonnets because she always did, barefoot of circumstance and deliberate of step, and her father walked beside her with his arm through hers. He didn't speak much. That was fine. That was exactly right. But near the chapel, just before the door, he stopped. She looked at him. His face was doing the thing it did when he was holding too many things at once. Not breaking, Jonas Ashford didn't break, but visibly holding, visibly working to contain something that was bigger than the container. "Your mother would have been here," he said. "I know. She would have fixed your collar 3 times even when it didn't need it." "I know that too." She put her hand over his. "She is here, Dad. She's in the stitching." He looked at the bodice of the dress, at his wife's work and his daughter's 3 small stitches beside it, and the thing he was containing shifted behind his eyes into something she couldn't name but recognized. The look of a man who has been carrying grief for so long that it has become part of his structure, not something separate from him that can be set down, but something he has learned to carry forward rather than be stopped by. She understood that look. She had worn it for 3 years. "All right," he said. He cleared his throat. He straightened slightly. "Let's go in." Blah. Levi was standing at the front of the chapel. He had on a clean shirt and his good jacket and her grandfather's gray hat, which he'd set on the pew beside him, and he was looking at the east window where the blue glass threw its colored light across the floor. When the door opened, he turned and he looked at her the way she thought later, and would think for the rest of her life. That a man looks at the thing he has decided is worth staying for, not like she was remarkable, not like she had transformed into something, like she was exactly who she was, and exactly who he wanted standing across from him in this limestone chapel in the Texas Hill Country on a blue flower morning in April. She walked up the aisle, Daniel on one side, May on the other, her father having taken his seat with the careful deliberateness of a man managing himself. And she stood across from Levi, and they looked at each other, and she thought about all the things that had brought her here, the river and the dress and the back porch, and the gray hat, and the coffee cup set on the counter, and the 3 stitches she'd added this morning while her hands shook, and the half-second he'd told her about, the one before he rode into the flood. All of it. Every imperfect, costly, unglamorous piece of it. The ceremony was short. Neither of them had wanted long. The words were the plain old words, the ones that had been said in chapels and homesteads and out on open land for generations, the ones that didn't try to be more than what they were. When it was done, Levi reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the single most gentle thing she had ever seen his hands do, and said, very quietly, just for her, "I'm staying." Not "I love you," though that was true. Not forever, though he meant it. Just those 2 words, which were the exact right words for exactly this man and exactly this moment, because staying was what it had always been about. The choice to stop running, the choice to put something in the ground and trust that you'd be there when it came up, the choice that had cost them both so much before they'd finally been able to make it. "I know," she said. She did know. She had known since the tomato plants, since the gray hat, since the water line fixed properly at the source. She knew. The reception, such as it was, happened in the Ashford kitchen and yard, which was the right place for it. Not fancy, not arranged to impress, just the ordinary space of ordinary life, made briefly festive with May's cooking and Daniel's general enthusiasm for any occasion that involved food and company. Jake came, which surprised Cora slightly and which she thought might have surprised him too. He shook Levi's hand and said, "The mare works well," which was the highest praise Jake was capable of generating, and Levi said, "She always did," which was the right answer, and they left it there. Neighbors came. The Hellers from 2 miles east, the Brandt family from the North Ridge, a few others from Millvale who had known the Ashfords long enough that not inviting them would have been its own statement. It was not a crowd, but it was enough. Enough people to fill the yard with noise and movement and the ordinary human business of eating together, which was, when you got down to it, one of the primary ways people signaled to each other that they intended to keep going. Late in the afternoon, when the yard was quieter and most of the neighbors had gone home with the long day feeling of people who had eaten well and stayed long enough, Cora found her father standing at the fence line looking south toward the lower pasture. She went and stood beside him. The bluebonnets were still up, still blue in the late afternoon light. The creek was a thin glitter in the distance, quiet and ordinary, the way it was most days. Nothing like the thing it became in flood. Nothing like the thing that had taken Wesley, or almost taken Daniel. Just a creek, running in its banks, doing what creeks do. "Do you remember," Jonas said, "what I told you the morning after I found out about Wesley?" She did. She would never forget it. She had been 23 years old, and she had come downstairs, and he had looked at her across the kitchen and said, "You're going to have to keep going. Not because it stops hurting, because you're a person, and that's what people do." She had hated him for it at the time. It had felt brutal. It had felt like he was refusing her the right to fall apart. She understood now that he had been telling her the only thing he knew how to say. The same thing he had told himself after her mother, the only rule he had that had held. "I remember," she said. "I meant it," he said. "I still mean it." He paused. "But I think I missed something." "What?" He was quiet, watching the creek. "You don't just keep going," he said. "You keep going toward something. I forgot the second part." He looked at her. "Your mother knew that. She was always moving toward something. I never understood what she was heading for until she was gone, and I couldn't ask her." Cora felt the ache of that, the specific, irreversible ache of the question you didn't know to ask in time. She was heading toward us, Cora said, toward the family, toward what she was building. Jonas looked back at the pasture. He nodded once, slowly. I know, he said. I know that now. They stood there in the late afternoon, father and daughter, watching the bluebonnets hold their color in the fading light, and the creek ran in the distance, and the hill country held its particular silence. And Cora thought about the things that stay, and the things that go, and the very thin, very durable